Welcome to the daily market wrap, the biggest charts in 30 minutes. And because today is Friday, we're going to take a look at not just the biggest charts of today, but we're going to take a look at over the last week. So why don't we go ahead and kick things off here with BTC, Bitcoin. And oh my goodness, look at this V-shaped bottom that Bitcoin has formed. This is on the 4-hour chart here, and looks as though it might be starting to flag off a little bit after having pushed higher. Take a look at that trough. So you'll notice that as you spend more time analyzing charts as a technical analyst, you'll notice that there are certain patterns that replay on different time frames. Different assets replay the same type of patterns over and over and over again on different time frames. And so notice on the 4-hour, we've got this V-shaped bottom. But let's go ahead and zoom in to the hourly. On the hourly chart, we see something similar, V-shaped bottom. If we zoom in even further to the 5-minute, we will notice there it is. There's the flush and there's the V-shaped bottom on the 5-minute. So you'll see on all of these different charts of digital assets that we're going to take a look at tonight, you'll see that same type of flush. So when there's a flush out, that tends to mark a bottom, especially if you've got like a really nice V-shaped reversal. And we see that in all sorts of different digital asset markets. But even with the V-shaped bottom, does this rally have legs? That's the question to ask. And so let's zoom out here to a daily. And here from the daily, I want to go ahead and actually zoom out a little bit further. I want to be able to mark this level and explain why this level is important. So now that we're zoomed out to the weekly on Bitcoin, take a look at the resistance above from the 2017 high. We connect to the 2021 high and extend to the right. That gives us trend line resistance all the way up here at 126, the all-time high for Bitcoin. Now we've got the 200-week moving average coming in down here at, let's call it 58K. And Bitcoin bounced at 60K yesterday. So it came down and just about tested that 200-week moving average down there. And that has been an important level of support, but it has also been in every previous Bitcoin bear market, a level that Bitcoin checks in with. And so we just got the first test of that 50-week. I've got it marked here with this arrow. Now, we know that we're in a Bitcoin bear market because we've had a couple of weekly closes below the 50-week. And in every previous Bitcoin bull market, you get a couple of tests of the 50-week on the way up. And then when the 50-week breaks, that starts the bear. So looks like the bear began in early November. And so bear markets in Bitcoin in every previous cycle, they've lasted for around 12 months. So if it lasts for 11 months this time, then maybe in October-ish, that's when the end of the bear, we can mark the end of the bear by October of this year. And so what does that tell you about this bit of support for Bitcoin now? If the bear market in Bitcoin continues until October of this year, but we've already come down and tested the 200-week moving average, let's just go ahead and mark October. There it is. There's October. So what this tells me is that even if Bitcoin is able to rally up to resistance or even above resistance here, I think it probably comes back around and tests that 200-week moving average one more time and maybe even breaks below it. So this is, even though we're getting that V-shaped bottom and that big bounce coming in, and this is a big wick on the weekly, even though we're getting all that coming in for Bitcoin and just about every other digital asset, still, I think that we end up retesting that 200-week at some point over the next several months. Maybe, who knows, but maybe in the summertime. And so what that means for me is I'm a seller of any rally here. I'm waiting for a rally to pick up a little bit more steam so that I can reload some short positions. Now, that's a little bit there about Bitcoin. Let's go ahead and shift gears. Let's take a look at Ethereum. Then we're going to roll down the list. From there, we'll take a look at the stock market, Mag 7 items, gold, silver, the dollar, and maybe some other currencies. Okay, so here's Ethereum. Big move on the downside. And if I just measure the last 3 weeks here from peak to trough, it's minus 46% out of Ethereum over the last 3 weeks. For Bitcoin, something similar, but Bitcoin is a lower volatility asset, so it only declined by 36%. So big moves. And you know what? After declining by nearly 50% over just, call it 21 days for Ethereum, I think it's probably time for this bounce to continue a little bit higher here. Now, if we zoom in from a daily, or zoom into a daily, let's just take a look at where that resistance comes in for ETH. It comes in right here at 2120 or so. That was support. Let me go ahead and move that up. That was support back during those Iran strike lows when ETH dumped and then pumped. You can thank Tom Lee, I think, for this big move out of ETH on the way up last year. But that level was support. It broke. And now that it's broken, it becomes resistance. And so today, the price action today actually did not break out above that level of resistance. So I'll be watching that closely. 2120 for ETH. I think that's an important level. But if Bitcoin is able to rally all the way up, let's see if I can get Bitcoin up here. If Bitcoin is able to rally all the way up to its own respective level of resistance, which is 74.3, if Bitcoin can get back up here and break it, then I would expect ETH to also be able to push above 2120. However, if this is all that she's got, if this is all there is for the bounce and BTC, and we just see this weaken back down to the 200-week moving average that I've drawn in down here, if that's what we see, well, then, this bounce could be short-lived. And that would be, a decline of an additional 16% over the next couple of days, couple of weeks in BTC. So are we going to push higher above this 74.3 resistance? Or has Bitcoin already put in the bounce? And will it simply just, continue on down to its 200-week moving average and maybe even break down below it? Time will tell. Let's take a look at Solana. Solana put in a really big bull hammer candlestick pattern here. And it bounced just kind of at a random level. If we zoom out here to a weekly, just notice, I've marked the low from yesterday, the low of this weekly candle on Sol. I marked it there. It came in at 67. So Solana got down all the way to $67 yesterday. Big bounce. But there's resistance above here at 95. And then also further above at the 200-week moving average up here at 103. So Solana's got some legitimate resistance on the way up at 95 and 103. I would expect that zone to be solid resistance. Now, these more volatile altcoins like Solana and then every other coin that we're going to take a look at after Solana, the rallies may be more violent, but I don't think that these coins have seen their bear market lows yet. Because if Bitcoin still has several more months potentially on the downside, then that makes it very unlikely that the Solana or any of the other altcoins have actually hit their lows. Probably not. So Solana, resistance at 95 and then 103. And at this level at 67, this would be some support actually. So this is going to be support for Sol. It's right in between my target here and the resistance up above. So this level at 67, get through that, and I think Sol goes down to 35. So that's my target on Sol for this bear market is $35. Let's see here. How about we move on to XRP? Everyone's favorite XRP. Man, XRP put in an amazing bounce off of the 200-week moving average today and yesterday. And so if we just zoom in a little bit, at one point, XRP was up nearly 30%. Now, XRP has some very clear levels of resistance above. We've got this trend line resistance above. Let me just go ahead and fix that there. Okay, looks good. So trend line resistance above, but also you've got the breakdown. So XRP's breakdown is right there at $1.77. So if there is more to the upside, more legs out of this bounce, then $1.77 I think would be some pretty solid resistance. And if it gets up there, I will definitely be opening some fresh short positions on XRP at like $1. I'll start by scaling in at like $1.70 or something like that. Because I don't think that XRP has put in its bear cycle lows, not yet. it might have, depends on what this bounce shakes up, but it might be something like that. And then just come on down and test in, check in with 60 cents. I think that 60 cents is more likely for a bear market lows for XRP than $1.11. So big balance out of XRP after essentially it crashed yesterday. But I don't think that that's all she wrote. I think XRP's got more room on the downside. And, if it just goes, further lower from here, that would be 50%, 56%. So plenty more room on the downside for XRP to go. Let's take a look at XMR. This is one of the privacy tokens here. So massive move out of XMR, this Monero, and then gave it all back, broke support on the way down at two important levels, trendline support here at 430, and this is the 200-day moving average here at 370. So big breaks of support, and this was just a crash in the session yesterday. So that and then really weak bounce. Compare XMR's bounce to other high volatility altcoins, and its bounce is relatively shallow, relatively small by comparison. Didn't even manage to get back up to the 200-week or 200-day, moving average. So if there's more out of this bounce, then I would expect that 200-day to be some type of resistance for XMR. And I think that XMR, on the way down is probably a short all the way down to 180. So we'll see, but I haven't been trading this one yet. And a little bit more on the upside out of this bounce, and I might start to get short XMR. Don't think that the bear market lows are in for this one yet, and not by a long shot. Let's take a look at SUI, SUI. Alrighty, so SUI has, put in, it's basically working its way down to like 30 cents, maybe 38, 40 cents down here, the bottom of this zone that I've drawn in. And big breakdown out of SUI. So if we zoom in here, big breakdown, the breakdown at $1.30. And yesterday or earlier in the session today, SUI was all the way down at 79 cents. So big bounce from 79 cents up to $1. And if there's more room to the upside out of SUI, I would expect that $1.30 level to hold as resistance. So if SUI is able to get up there, man, that would be a great entry for a short position up here at like $1.23, $1.25, something like that. Your initial entry, maybe scale in from $1.20 to $1.25 up in this region up here. Definitely looks like an interesting short if it can push a little bit higher, because I think SUI ends up going down to 55 cents or maybe 35 cents in this zone down here. So if it does something like that, well, then there's still, 50% left on the downside out of SUI. One of my favorite short plays, just waiting to reload after, closing my shorts last night. So, let's take a look at Link. How about Link? Well, big bounce out of Link, but notice this channel that it's in. So this was from last bear cycle, and it carved out this, pretty clear symmetrical channel here. And when it broke down into the channel last cycle, notice right here, when it broke down into the channel last cycle, it basically moved straight down into the bottom third of the channel. Now, this cycle, this bear cycle, Link broke down into the channel, but didn't make it all the way down to the bottom third of the channel. So if it's able to get back up a little bit higher, I would expect that the top of this channel will be some type of resistance for Link, maybe around 965 or so. So that would be an interesting opportunity to get short, because if it moves down to $5, let's say that you get a good entry on the short at the top of the channel, that's 45% or so. Not a bad entry at the top of the channel. So if there's more bounce out of Bitcoin, then there's probably a little bit more bounce left out of Link. And if we just zoom out here to a weekly, let's just take a look and see what has this move looked like over the last 3 weeks on the downside. Well, it has been around, 46%. So big move over the last 3 weeks. I think it would make sense that there would be some type of a bounce, but I do think that eventually we get down here to the bottom third of this channel that I've drawn in. Let's take a look here at AVAX. AVAX. Now, this is a really ugly pattern. It looks like AVAX might be about to repeat this type of triangle pattern here. Let me just go ahead and draw this in. This is from last cycle, last bear market here. So that is a descending wedge. Those are actually bullish price action patterns, and it did break out. But does that mean that if AVAX is going to carve out a descending wedge this bear cycle, that it does something, oh, I don't know, maybe like this? I'll use this as my anchor, and like so, and then maybe you've got something like so, or, I think this probably makes more sense. Yeah, I don't know. I think it needs to go down further before we can start drawing in a pattern like that. But there's no reason to think that AVAX couldn't move further to the downside. You see this little channel that I've drawn in on AVAX? Let me go ahead and zoom in from a weekly to a daily here so that we can see this a little bit more clearly. So here's the breakdown. So there's the support, breakdown. And now this horizontal underneath, that marks the October 10th flash crash lows, but it's also where we found support, that double bottom in AVAX at the end of last bear cycle for AVAX. So these two levels up here, this is resistance, the top of this channel here at $11.30, and down below is support, the flash crash lows and last bear market's lows at $8.53. So the fact that AVAX broke down below 853, even though it's bounced back up into the channel, really makes me think that it's got plenty more room on the downside, especially if Bitcoin moves a little bit lower here. Wouldn't surprise me to see AVAX back down here. Let's mark that. So that would be the lows from 2020 at $2 or $2.88. So it could definitely get down there. And that type of a move from where it's currently trading, that is a big move, 67%. Man, so that's actually a pretty attractive short. Especially if there's a little bit more of a bounce that comes into AVAX, because I think that this bear market is actually, has plenty more time left. I don't think that this is the bottom for AVAX. So if it gets down to those lows from 2020, man, $3 for AVAX. Just remember that this token has in the past put in these massive monster rallies. So, if you're able to pick it up for $3 and it repeats its 2020 rally, that's a 20x. So nothing wrong with a 20xer, especially if you can pick it up for $3, pick it up for super cheap and then just a small position. These are like moonshots. This is just like a moon bag that I'm trying to put together here by going through all these altcoin charts, because, like during the next bull market, these alts could really accelerate to the upside. I'm thinking AVAX, SUI, maybe a handful of others. Let's take a look at Tau. So BitTensor Tau, one of my favorite AI plays, just a really useful protocol. But this level 170, similar to the way AVAX broke below its horizontal support, in Tau, 170 was an important level of support, and it broke. That 170 level broke yesterday. And so, yes, Tau was able to reclaim 170, but just barely. So the fact that that's already broken, and it really didn't put in that solid of a hammer candle here. I mean, it is a bull hammer, but not quite as solid as some of the other alts, makes me think that there might be more downside out of Tau, all the way down maybe to, down here at $98, $95. That's 50% on the downside. So nothing wrong with 50%, especially since you don't have to use any leverage if you want to trade this. So I'm going to move Tau up to the top. That looks like an interesting short. I like AVAX as a short. I like Link as a short. I like SUI as a short. I like XMR as a short. I like XRP as a short. Let's take a look at maybe Hype. Let's see what's going on with Hype. So Hype's put in this interesting pattern here. This is definitely some trend line support. We've got some resistance up above at 50. I just drew that in. That seems like decent resistance above. But before that, you got the 200-day moving average that has to get broken above. And take a look at those wicks. So it's some big wicks up here at the 200-day moving average for Hype. So it's basically chopping around within this zone here. And I could just draw this in a little bit so you can see this a little bit more clearly. So right there, there's resistance. And right here, there's support. So support comes in at like $28, resistance comes in at $37. So just kind of range bound for the time being on hype. But I have a hard time seeing hype rally if Bitcoin isn't able to rally. Even though hype has been rallying, it's been one of the outliers here. I don't think that that continues. All of these digital assets eventually they kind of trade in kind. So yeah, I think if Bitcoin really gives it up again, that hype will too. Let's take a look at Aave. Aave actually broke down below an important long-term level of support. So this trend line support here was broken yesterday, and Aave has not been able to reclaim that. So that is now resistance. And if we zoom in here a little bit, you can see it. There's the level of resistance. There's the breakdown and the crash, and there's resistance. So this actually could be an interesting short entry, depending on what your thoughts are on BTC. If you think that BTC doesn't hold this rally and that's all it's got, there's no more rally left out of BTC, then all of these alts are screaming sells right here. But yeah, Aave looks like it's probably got support at 80. This zone down here, I just drew in this zone. So I think that 80 might be an interesting level to, if you're going to get short now, to close a short position if it gets down there. But it could go as low as 50. That wouldn't surprise me. And that probably makes sense, 50. So, that's 58% on the downside. Plenty more room on the downside for Aave. Let's take a look at BNB. BNB. So BNB, false breakout. I think I'm going to just label this a big false breakout here. That is the false breakout in BNB. And now that it's back into this little channel here, it broke on the downside also. And if this bounce continues, okay, great. Well, that must mean that Bitcoin is rallying. But if Bitcoin doesn't hold its rally and actually turns around and continues moving to the downside, well, then BNB, where's support for BNB? It's much, much further lower. So let's just draw that in. So I think that the first region would be like right around here, 500. The next region, just this horizontal right there, 400. So, and BNB is at 655 right now. So if it fails this level of support, if that breaks, then we could be talking about either a 20% move or a more like a 40% move. So I think that this is probably in the cards for BNB, 40% more downside out of BNB. We'll see what this bounce shakes up to be, but certainly looks as though it's an interesting short opportunity if it pushes a little bit higher. Here's Uni. And, Uni, oh man, just getting smoked here. Now it's got the crash lows. Let me mark that right there. So $2. That was the October 10th flash crash low for Uni. And it looks like it's in a hurry to get back to $2. That's what it looks like. Notice that was also support back in 2020. I'm going to go ahead and mark that. So the 2020 support, $1.82. So, from $3.54 to $1.82, that's 45%. That is, nothing to shake a stick at. 45% with no leverage. You can do pretty well. So, yeah, and could it go even further? Yes, it could. So, just getting down to $1.82, though, would be in line with other alts that we've just been taking a look at here. Here's Pendle. So this is a reward and governance token over on the Pendle protocol. Here's the level of support, pretty clearly defined. Here's the breakdown, and here's the all-time low. So Pendle on the downside has another 60% to its all-time low to get down there. So that, again, that's in line with all the rest of these alts that we're taking a look at. Now, the bounce, on the other hand, Pendle really didn't put in much of a bounce. So, take a look at that. Most other tokens bounced. Pendle really hasn't. So maybe, these alts are actually interesting shorts now, rather than even waiting for a bounce. Maybe just nibble on the short side now. And, if Bitcoin just continues pushing lower, then, get rewarded that way and just scale in very, very slowly. Maybe initiate a short position now and zero leverage. Just initiate the position, and you could pick all of these alts, like all of them. I think they're all screaming sells. Let's take a look here at maybe something like Doge. So Doge, one of the more volatile of the altcoins. It's a meme coin here, so no real utility out of this. And that was the explosion in Doge back in 2021. Big move, man. If you had purchased this thing back then and held it even for a year and a half or a year or so, you did phenomenally well. It's just it's gambling, and that's what these meme coins are. They're just gambling. And now that Doge is moving back down into this region from last bear cycle, let me just go ahead and mark this off a little bit here so we can see where some support and resistance might lie. And let's zoom in a little bit on this daily. There we go. So resistance up above at 10 cents, support at 5 cents, trading for 9 cents. So there's plenty more room just to get to support out of Doge. 45% on the downside. That's in line with just about every other alt that we've seen so far. Here's SPX. So SPX is another meme coin, bounced off of, I don't know if that's the all-time low, but probably not. I think that that's just a low. And I think that this data, there's not enough data here to show the all-time low, which I think is much lower. But that's an important low. It held as support. If that breaks as support, let's see if I can find a better data set here. SPX USDT. There we go. And maybe MEXC has the most data. Let's see. Nope, it does not. SPX. How about SPX USD in crypto? Which one has the most data here? I'm going to go with the top one. And yeah, not enough data either. So that's kind of a shame. I'll just go back to the one that I had, Kraken. And if this fails, and if SPX were to continue moving lower, I think it probably just goes to zero. I think that these meme coins just fail and go to zero. So let's say that it goes down by 50 cents or 50%. That would be all the way down to 15 cents. But why stop at 15 cents? This could go straight to zero. So we're talking about like going straight to zero. You could make 100% on the trade just by holding it with no leverage. Now, big bounce here, but starting to fade, starting to give it back. We're not seeing the continuation. There's no exuberance. There's no momentum out of this bounce. No one wants to buy crypto right now. People are interested in buying precious metals. So even with the crash in Bitcoin, it's the interest is just not there. So this is ARB, the Arbitrum Governance Token. And I don't know why this exists. It's like, let's go ahead and draw in some resistance above, something like that. And this is actually a pretty bullish pattern. This type of pattern here, this is a very bullish descending wedge. So, these patterns tend to break out on the upside in a big way. So even though I don't think that there's a reason for existing for ARB, it doesn't really matter. This is a bullish pattern. So if it gets down to the bottom, maybe at 2 cents, oh man, that would be such a monster trade to get this down to 2 cents. It probably has, if it goes down to 2 cents, the bottom of this level of support, that's minus 80%. That makes sense. That makes sense to me. That ARB would decline by a greater percentage amount throughout the rest of this bear market than maybe some of the other alts, but then have some type of monster recovery just because it's so illiquid. I bet this actually sounds like an interesting trade. And dude, I would pick up some ARB at 2 cents for sure. Why not? Because you could get a ton of tokens, and if it has some type of recovery, then you do phenomenally well. How about, we can wrap things up with gold and silver. Okay, so I think a lot of the exuberance has been flushed out from gold. The volatility seems to be declining a little bit. The volumes in those Uniswap pools are declining a little bit, which tells me not as much vol. So yeah, the fact that some of the volatility has been sucked out and yet it's still sitting at $5,000, that's very bullish for gold. Same thing with silver. So silver probably has support, solid support down at 55. And it wouldn't surprise me if it makes its way down there just to check in with the moving average as it comes up. But even at $55 for silver, that's still holding on to a vast majority of the gains. So, and then it's just a matter of basing. Or it could just continue to push higher from here. We shall see. But I think both in gold and silver, the exuberance has been flushed out, and now they can resume their uptrends. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining this call live. I really appreciate you guys, and I will see you all on Monday. Have a great weekend and stay safe out there.